I'm back. Time to look at 20.1. New nations in South Asia and Southeast Asia. Some of the key objectives that we'll look at the partition of India, the division of. We'll describe the nationalist developments in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. We'll define the role of South Asia in the Cold War, and we'll explain the impact of independence on nations in Southeast Asia. All right, so we look here, obviously we studied the independence movement in India under Gandhi. After World War II, nationalists in India were demanding independence from Great Britain. Gandhi had been fighting for decades in a wide variety of peaceful ways to try and get independence for the Indian people from Great Britain. There was concern about if they did split up, how in the world would they handle the crisis between Muslims and Hindus? Obviously, religious differences, they didn't really cooperate and get along very well. The British, because they were in control of the entire area, the Indian natives, the indigenous people there, didn't really fight too much, over it. They obviously knew the British would squash both of them. So, in some ways, the Brits kept the differences between Muslims and Hindus from kind of percolating to the surface. As the British government decided to grant independence, violence between the two groups escalated as there was competition to see who would control the vast territory of India. In response, the British government decided that instead they would partition or divide up India into two separate nations, India and Pakistan. And what they would do is they would move out the Muslims from India, leaving behind the majority Hindu population in the main area of India. So if you look at the map here, the area in the brown is India. Now Pakistan is going to get carved out of the northwestern corner of India, and then a tiny little spot here in the eastern corner. This was East Pakistan. Later on, this becomes Bangladesh in the 1970s. You can see Pakistan here in the green color that's formed in 1948. Union of India, this is the brown area here. Okay, we'll see how this is going to play out as we move forward. What are some of the challenges that India has faced as the world's largest parliamentary democracy from this period of time in 1947 through contemporary times? Well, you continually have ethnic and religious tension these tensions have threatened the unity of the country. There's over 100 different languages and many different dialects spoken within the country. Poverty is widespread and income inequality is great. 3, why has there been conflict between Indian traditions and some government programs since 1947? Despite many political leaders working to modernize India, traditional Indian beliefs still play a huge part in the way in which the Indian society functions. In 1947, discrimination against different groups was banned, and the government set aside more opportunities, especially for those in the lower caste system. We didn't really talk too much about it, but I'm sure you've learned before about the Hindu caste system and how certain groups within the Indian culture are kind of looked down upon in the lower caste, kind of as the outcast. However, discrimination continued, with better opportunities still going to those who were in the higher social class system. 4, what economic and geographic factors led to the creation of an independent Bangladesh? As a result of the partition, Pakistan was divided into East Pakistan and West Pakistan, separated by 1,000 miles of Indian territory. It obviously didn't seem very impractical. The West Pakistanians dominated the government and concentrated most of the economic advancement on West Pakistan, despite the fact that the population of East Pakistan at the time was larger. The residents of East Pakistan, who were largely Bengalis, were tired of living in poverty, not receiving any government assistance or aid, and the government neglect. And they declared their own independence in 1971, which is a great year in history. They named the new country Bangladesh after the Bengalis who lived in this region. After independence, Pakistan struggled to build a stable government. Support this statement with evidence. Power began to shift between political and military leaders. Ethnic tensions began to plague the country. Independent ethnic groups resisted a unified government. All these factors contributed to a very difficult transition during this period of time. Additionally, the separation of church and state became an issue, with fundamentalists working for a government based on religious tenets, meaning tied to religion, religious law. 6, why is the border between India and Pakistan still today one of the most dangerous borders in the world? Well, if you go back to the map, obviously you have this large boundary between Western Pakistan plus a disputed territory here in Kashmir. And they both have nuclear weapons. They're one of the few countries in the world today who are nuclear powers. And as such, it creates a lot of tension. You also have to throw in the fact that India is a continued growing population, over 1 billion people and growing. Religious differences, obviously, and the lack of trust between Hindus and Muslims, the Hindus in India, the Muslims in Pakistan. And because both sides have nuclear weapons, the threat of any small skirmish breaking out to a larger full-scale war is very dangerous, not only for Pakistan and India, but also for the regional area there, any of the countries that are on the borders in Asia and into the Middle East. Explain what the word colonialism means. We've looked at this before. It should be pretty easy for you, but we should review it just for the sake of understanding. Why do you think the new independent nations of South Asia rejected colonialism? Well, we know colonialism refers to the period of time, especially during the 1800s and 1700s. One nation taking control and populating another country, usually largely for economic purposes. If you remember the old 3Gs, God, gold, and glory, the primary reason why any country goes in to colonize another territory is from the profit's sake or the gold. The new South Asian nations were working for independence. In order to throw off the colonial superpowers, they were pushing against colonialism. Consequently, they wanted independence rather than continued occupation in colonial ways during this period. Identify the causes and effects of the non-aligned movement. Okay, causes by 1830, independence was on the rise in Africa, Asia, the Middle East. Post-World War II leaders like Gandhi and Nehru emerged in India. India and Pakistan gained independence. Independent nations began to reject the old Cold War practices of the Soviet Union and Western countries. Effects, hundreds of nations joined to maintain independence from the Cold War superpowers. India became one of the leaders of this movement. The non-aligned movement became the voice of third world countries. Nine. What do you think the word repressive means? What are some examples of repressive actions taken by governments in Southeast Asia? Repressive usually references, especially in terms of governmental policies, repressing freedoms or restricting freedoms. In Southeast Asia, repressive governments have long resisted the freedoms of certain ethnic and social groups within their borders, leading these groups to desire their own system of government. The Pakistani government concentrated most economic development programs in West Pakistan, while East Pakistan remained deep in poverty, which was obviously beyond comprehension. 10, compare economic conditions in Malaysia to those of Myanmar. Has this difference in the economy linked to wider differences between the countries? First of all, let me just put in a little note here. Myanmar used to be Burma, part of the old Indo-Chinese peninsula there that the French dominated for a long period of time. All right, so let's look at some of the comparisons here. Malaysia is a very diverse country. Its business activities were mostly dominated by the people of Chinese and Indian descent. However, the government has worked to make sure that the economic prosperity has been more equally distributed. The Burmese majority, in contrast, is dominated Myanmar. The military government in Myanmar has limited foreign trade, leading to a lack of economic prosperity and a low standard of living in that country. Okay, let's look at a little visual here for number 11. Using visual information, look at the diagram there. What can you conclude about ethnic and religious diversity in Southeast Asia? So I'll give you a moment there to reflect on what you see. Okay. If you look at the information presented in the visual, it shows the religious and ethnic diversity of the region. So it's not like a standardized area with all the same religion, but you can see, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, and Muslims, as well as some other religious groups that all have a presence in these areas. 12 would have been the main causes of violence in Indonesia. Okay, when we look at some of the main causes of violence in Indonesia, you have violence in Indonesia and around the world in general. Religion is always a source of conflict, as are ethnic differences. Other areas saw fighting break out between Christians and Muslims. Attacks have occurred throughout the country against people of Chinese descent. Muslim separatists, those living in Papua, have sought independence through violence. So there's a lot of problems in this region of the world. And finally, 13, why has economic growth in the Philippines been limited? Well, the government was set up as a democracy, but was actually controlled by a wealthy elite. The majority of the nation remained poor for a long period of time, while Ferdinand Marcos ruled as a dictator for a long period of time. Marcos eventually lost power to his successor, who worked to keep the country a democracy. However, the economy continues to be very fragile, as are many of these developing or third world countries. Contributing to all this is the fact that the country has the highest birth rate in Asia, taxing resources in this country even further. So again, I'll pause for a moment in case you want to edit this down. There's a little bit long-winded answers here. Okay, so at this point in time, you can complete the lesson reflection on your own. It's kind of an optional one there in terms of what countries you want to kind of characterize there. I'm not going to take you through a response there, but you could choose any of choose two of the independent nations discussed today, compare and contrast the road to independence between the two countries, what led to each nation's desire for independence, how did they gain their independence, and what effect did independence have on the growth and development of each country. You can kind of pick that out yourself, pick and choose what you'd like to take a little closer look at. It's kind of some free choice there. All right, so until next time, Mr. Clarke is out.